Today, it's all about the Mini's brakes. Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project Mini Green Bean. That's our 2005 Mini Cooper S. Today, guys, real simple, real important maintenance item we need to take care of: brakes. I don't know when the last time the brakes were done. The pads look like they have a lot of life on them. The rotors, pretty rough, look OEM. The brake fluid looks just like coffee. So I reckon it's time to get some life back into these old brakes. Let's get in the garage and get a little dirty. It's time to get some new pads, rotors, and fluid on this Mini Cooper S. I'm going to show you guys how to do the front and rear brakes on this vehicle, as well as the brake pad wear sensors and how to replace those wires. That should come with a quality brake replacement kit. So let me show you guys the tools we're going to need. I always like to have a 1/2-inch breaker bar on hand, just in case those caliper bolts are pretty stuck. 17mm socket and ratchet for those bolts. They can be on there pretty good, and you're going to need to pull those off to replace the rotor, at least in the front. On the back of the pistons, on each the front and back calipers, you will need a hex bit, an H7 to be exact, and that's to pull back those little sliders on the back of the brakes to get the pads off. Pretty straightforward there. Now for the rears, you will have to use a brake tool, and one of these universal kits is a real lifesaver. Just get yourself one of these. You don't have to buy an expensive one, but here's pretty much what it looks like. You've got all the various sizes you can use, one of the caliper retraction tools, and you have to spin it while applying pressure. That's the only way to push in that rear piston on the calipers on the Mini Cooper S. The front you can simply push back with a regular C-clamp. But just for the rears, I wanted to give you a heads up. If you don't have one of these, it's a good thing to invest in for sure. And then I like to use a pair of locking vice pliers here, and this will help with this tool here. You'll see how that works in the future, but let me show you guys. 4-inch C-clamp, that's gonna be for doing the front brake caliper. Gonna push that piston back with that, just normal, old school caliper technology there. So just push it back with that clamp, and you'll need yourself a can of brake clean to keep your brakes all nice and clean. Let's get these brakes swapped out. You're also going to want to have a jack stand nearby to support the caliper once you remove it. First thing you want to pop off is these little caps that are on the sliders. These little caps. Your brake kit should come with the replacement ones. There's the other one. Next you want to use that hex bit, the H7. Not a bad idea to pop this section out right here. You can use a screwdriver if yours is coming off kind of hard. There we go. Also, I like to pull off the brake pad sensor here. It loops over the bleeder screw, so you can go ahead and pop your bleeder screw off at this time. That helps a little bit. And actually unclips right from, you can pull it straight out from your brake pad area. You want to get that out of the way. Sometimes there's a little metal clip that falls off. No worries, we're going to be replacing that with our new brake hardware. So just set that out of the way. And now we should be loosened enough. Okay, then you want to take your caliper and support it with that jack stand we set out. If you need a little more slack on the line, you can pop it out here, the brake line, and go ahead and just support that caliper. This time you can pull the front brake pad off. You can see we have plenty of pad life left, but these look old. I'm doing the rotors anyway because the rotors have a very well-defined lip and a lot of deep line gouges. So I think it was recently given a cheap pad slap, but we're gonna put some good pads on there and new rotors. So that's how we're gonna do that. Next, to get the rotor off, we gotta loosen up those 17mm bolts on the back of the caliper bracket, the holding bracket. So see that? These can sometimes take some force. As you can see, we can remove that. We'll clean it up with a wire brush. And your rotor is free to remove at this time. It's time to retract the piston on our front caliper. To do so, go ahead and leave that brake pad in there. Getting the old C-clamp right here. There's a little place where you can mount it. And you're gonna keep turning that until you can see the pad pushing that piston all the way back into the caliper. Okay, all the way in. Go ahead and take your C-clamp off. Do not forget to remove the pad. Now these pads are interesting. You'll see with your new pads that it has these clips inside. This goes inside the piston, which is a pretty neat design on this car. So keep that in mind when you put your new pads on. And that's what we're gonna be putting on. These are really good ones. I've used these in the past, very good brakes. And even though we don't have the little screw, we're just gonna line these up still with the holes like so. Lug bolts here to kind of hold the rotor somewhat in place. Time for our new pads. As you saw, the rear has this, and if your new pads didn't come with this, that's gonna be a concern. And it does snug right up into that piston, so we'll put the front one on like so. Should stay there just enough. This back one we're gonna lock right into the piston there. There we go, snap that right all the way in. We're gonna use our retainer thing again. Now you might need a screwdriver to help this fit over. It's gonna be really tight, especially with new pads. And there we go. We're done the pads and rotors at this point. The next thing we need to do is that sensor we removed. So I'm gonna show you guys how to do that in the driver's side front of your Mini Cooper S. And it should be the same for the regular Mini Cooper. So let me show you that. Don't forget your little caps to go on the back of these hex screw sections. Go ahead and grab some brake cleaner. Hose it down, especially these old calipers. See all that nasty brake dust come off from our wire brushing. Nice clean shop rag and clean up all the spots we touched with our dirty mitts. Here's the sensor that we disconnected from the brake pads. This is the brake pad wear sensor. We're gonna trace the wire back through its various holding things, and if you pull back this pin here, which you can flip back, you'll see tucked up in there the connector where it goes. So go ahead, disconnect that, disconnect all the little connectors it has holding it in place, and we'll replace it with the new one. And this is the clip end of where it plugs into where the car harness is. So that's the part you're gonna be pulling out. Then undoing all these little fasteners along the way. You should do this every time you replace the pads, guys. And there we go. Got the whole unit removed. Here's our brand new unit ready to go in. Measure it, make sure it's compatible with the one you just removed, the same length, everything like that. Let's go ahead. I like to plug the connector in first, trace the wire back, and secure it back into the pads. After tracing back that brake pad sensor wire and installing it in the correct way, you want to go ahead and slide this section here over the bleeder valve area, like so. Put your bleeder valve cap back on, even though we're going to take that off the bleed shortly. Here's the actual sensor. It only goes one way into the pad, so you want to make sure you're lining that up perfectly. Secure that all the way into it, clicks into place. It should have a little metal thing that holds it, and that's it. That's your brake pad wear sensor. I'm gonna actually show you right now how to do the one, because the other one on the car is the passenger rear. So you always get one for each side when you do a brake job. They're not on every single caliper. So I'll show you guys how to do that one next. Your Mini Cooper brake kit might have come with this weird looking sensor wire here. This is a brake pad width measurer. It'll set off a sensor when the brake pads are too thin. So that's pretty cool. You should replace these every time you are doing your pads and rotors. And I'll show you guys how to do this now. Now there's only two sensors on the car. One of them is in the driver's side front, which I've already shown you, and the other is in the passenger rear. So the right side of the vehicle rear and the left side of the vehicle front. So I'm gonna show you how to replace this. We're in the passenger rear right now. Let me take you under the car and show you where that goes. We're here on the back of the rear caliper. You're gonna simply pull the sensor right out from where it's attached to the pads. It has a loop that goes over the bleeder valve. And then you're gonna trace it all the way back, and you're gonna go way back under the car, and I'm probably gonna need a flashlight to get up in there. You can see that blue cable up in there. Right behind that is the black one. You can see I've already loosened it up. You're gonna disconnect that black clip, and that's where the new one plugs in. So you're gonna pull that old one out. After connecting and clipping in your brake pad wire, follow the original path back to the brake pads, snap that section in place. You can see the bleeder valve there. It should have a rubber loop that goes over that. You then want to, at this time, put your bleeder valve cap back on, and you're good to go. Time to do the rear brakes on our Cooper S. Now we are doing the driver's side. That was the passenger side I just showed you with the sensor. So there's no sensor on the driver's side rear, so it's pretty straightforward. A couple other tips I want to give you. Make sure your e-brake is off while you're doing this job, because the e-brake's integrated into this caliper. which means it'll be grabbing that rotor, and we don't want that. We also have to remove the bracket for the actual caliper. We're just gonna be removing the sliding section, those little H7 hex pieces, and that's all you need to do to get the pads and rotor off the rear. And go ahead and support your caliper like we did before with a jack stand. Pads are a little more worn in the rear, but still not horrible. As you can see, the rear pad has this like clip integrated into it, and you should have that on your replacement pads too. This locks into that rear piston. But I'm gonna show you more on that piston because to retract it here on the rear caliper, it's a little different than the front. So to retract the piston here on these rear calipers on our Mini, we do have to use a special tool, one of these guys right here. This is the one I have that fits it perfectly. You can mess around with these heads if you have one of those universal kits like I do, and that'll help you get to the right size. You can see the 4 holes on the back of our caliper there, and that's what you really need to lock into. You put the unit together like so, and slide it in, and you need to be applying force at the same time as you turn it, which is interesting, and these always turn a little bit harder at first. And this plate kind of pushes against the caliper itself and gives you that resistance to keep pushing in. What I like to do, because you have to constantly keep adjusting that one, is use some locking vice grip pliers, and that'll kind of hold it in. So let me show you guys what I'm talking about here. And it honestly feels like harder to turn it first, then it gets better, so let's use our pliers like I said I was gonna. Eventually you'll get that piston all the way back there after arm wrestling with this thing for an extended period of time. Now it's time to put the new rotor and pads in. So let me show you guys how to do that. Like I promised before, you don't need to remove the caliper bracket on the rear. You just simply get the rotor out like so. And the rears will be rocking these Power Stop Eurostop high carbon rotors. Really good, nice sporty feel. I've loved them, used them in the past. Paired with the Power Stop Evolution carbon fiber ceramic performance pads. This provides a better than stock braking performance from this car, which is great because it is such a nimble handler. Good brakes go a long way with a Mini Cooper S. So I'm happy to put this hardware back on. Let's go ahead and get it going. Again, don't forget your grease to grease up the sections, the ears especially, where your new pads are gonna go. That just prevents any kind of squealing or weird noises if there's rust or other corrosion built up. Just kind of stick it in the ears there. You don't need to go too crazy. You don't want any of this touching the pad surface or the rotor surface to impede braking. I also like to put a little grease on these guys before you install them again. And now it's time to put some fresh fluid in it and bleed the brakes. To finish off our brake job here on the Cooper S, we're gonna go ahead and bleed the brakes. Now, bleeding is important if your brakes haven't been done in a long time, just to get new fluid through the system. Old fluid can absorb water and cause your braking performance to go down. Also, if you opened up any of your lines, whether you're doing stainless steel lines or had to replace a caliper and introduced air into your system, you're also gonna wanna bleed the system at this point. Pretty straightforward. I've got my Motive Power Bleeder. You can use the 2-person step on the brake pedal. Someone turns the bleeder valve method too. But solo in the garage, this is the way I do things. So we're gonna put .4 fluid into our bleeder, pressurize the system to 15 PSI, which is what I usually do. If you do track days, you do things like that, you might wanna get a higher temp brake fluid. This is pretty good. This is a good quality brand. Don't cheap out on your brake fluid, but yeah, if you're gonna do some performance driving and this is your track weapon, this Cooper S, go ahead and upgrade the brake fluid as well. But for what I'm using, a 4 street driven, this will get the job done. Couple other points, the only tool you need for this job other than the power bleeder is a 10mm wrench, and that's to loosen the bleeder screws. Once we pressurize the system, we're gonna go around the car furthest from the master. So that means we're gonna do that passenger rear, driver side rear, passenger front, driver front. And that's it. That's how we're gonna bleed the system. Let's work around the car and loosen some bleeder valves. We're here at our last caliper, the driver's side front, and it's no different than the other 3 we just did. We have a sensor on this one, so we're gonna go ahead and pull off the little clip and everything, get that out of the way. I've also ensured that we've kept 15 PSI in our bleeder at all times, and we haven't run low on fluid, so that's nice. So go ahead and orient your wrench in a way you can loosen the nut to release that fluid. Get your hose and bottle ready. connect the hose. Nice tight fit, perfect. And then we're gonna go ahead and crack it loose and we should get the last of this really dark fluid out of the car. Oh yeah, look at it, just like coffee coming out. So great time to flush the brake fluid when it turns that color. We're gonna let that run just like we've done for the previous 3 calipers until it's nice and golden clear. And as you can see, we're already flowing like a nice golden brake fluid clear. So go ahead and tighten the bleeder valve. Don't have to go too hard on these, just enough to cinch it down. Go ahead and pull your hose out. I like to hold it up a little bit so it drains nicely into my bottle. We can now move that out of the way. We can remove our wrench at this time. And since this does have the sensor, we're gonna put the little sensor holder thing over there, over the bleeder valve, and then put the bleeder valve cap on. In case there's any dribble there when we pulled out, we'll clean off with a little rag. And guess what, folks? We're done. We have completely bled the entire brake system on the Mini Cooper S. All new rotors, all new pads, and you wanna go ahead and really bed in your new brakes. Just do a couple stops, usually from 50 to 10 miles an hour. Get them nice hot, get them used to get the mating surface matched up. That's the rotor and the pad. And then you'll be good. You'll have really good brakes for a long time. Brakes complete.